Hello, my Doomscribblers. So, a wrap up and some explanations about what's been going on since you last submitted your chapters, which is a long time ago. And for some of you, really a long time ago. The people who finished first, it's a year now for some of those people. So, we had a hard deadline of mid-May last year. And then I went to Madrid, came back and started working on the books, and I had to work on all three series so that I could get those ready for release, and then go back and do them series by series. So what have I been doing for that whole time? I have been working on these books for that entire time. Obviously, there was some tone smoothing to do. Everybody worked on it while we were creating these chapters, but there were still variations in dialogue, action, interiority, and exposition, and you'll still see that in the books. You'll still see that some chapters are heavier in the descriptive prose and others are heavier in dialogue, and I tried to even it out without losing the voice of the people who were writing, and without losing the characters and the decisions that we had made for their characters' arcs, but by making it feel like this was one writer who had written all the books. I think that there's an opportunity now for everyone who has written in these series to level up, if you're interested in leveling up. And I believe we can always, no matter where you are in your journey, your craft journey, you can always level up. And one of the things, I've told you this before, one of the things that I did when I did my novel writing course at UCLA was we would submit chapters each week. There were only 10 people in the course, and an instructor, and the instructor read everybody's chapters and gave feedback in all caps in your manuscript, which really is a way to learn how to not read all caps as shouting. She did it so she could find her notes and you could find her notes easily. And I read everybody's feedback. Every single week I read everybody's feedback. And you were obliged to give feedback to 2 people in your group. And of course, I care very much about equality, so I made myself a little chart so that even though there were people who were easier to get on with or who brought more to the class, I did it evenly so that I was giving feedback to people on a rotational basis. And that's what we did for nearly 2 years. That's what we did. We gave each other feedback into each other's chapters, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful way to level up. And now that they're done, and I've been through all of them with feedback from Micah, so that we are hitting post-apoc tropes much harder than some of those chapters were. If you take the last series of your books and you do a side-by-side comparison of what's there now, that will help you level up. It will give you pointers about where you were or weren't in sync with the other writers who were writing in your series. Of course, this got harder when we merged teams. It got much, much harder. But we were losing people. There was a lot that went on behind the scenes. And I didn't want to share that with you because I didn't want to stress you out. But there was a lot that went on behind the scenes. And as we lost people, some of those books, they didn't have enough writers and they weren't going to finish. And if I had to do it again, I would do a different thing. But we merged the groups and we ended up with these mega books with these big, fabulous, complex stories. And what we're seeing in the comments is that people who enjoy multiple POV books stick with them. And the longer they stick with them, the more they love them. You can absolutely see that our ratings are going up as the books go on. And by the time they get to the end, they really, really love them. So my recommendation to you is find the final version of the book. You might need to go to your team leader to ask for that. Find the final version of the book before it came to me. Micah is willing to give anybody who wants it a copy of the book in whatever format you need it. He can do it in multiple formats, obviously, because he's Micah. And do a side-by-side so you can see what kind of changes were made. Other changes that I made. So we had agreed across all 3 groups that by the end of book 2, lights must be out, all lights out, so we are solidly in post-apoc land, and gas will have run out. Now, we made some exceptions because we had some rich people in the mix, but too many people made too many exceptions. So we had a lot of people who still had access to gas. And I had to come up with rationales for why that was. And then, so you'll see, for example, in Dead Sea, we had a lot of people who still had access to stuff that they shouldn't, in our brand of post-apoc, that they shouldn't necessarily have access to. So the character that I wrote, Joe Trund, was on an island with no access to electricity, to gas, to petrol. And so it was really, really on the ground. And that was a deliberate choice that I made because we had too many people who had access still to vehicles, and we had too many rich people in the mix. In all three of the series, we had too many rich people in the mix, and our readers really, really like your average Joe, your average Josephine, who are going up against the odds. And so I had to really tone down some of that stuff. Other choices that I had to make, we were looking at deliberately as a choice of blending more than one genre, which is one of the ways that you level up your books, is you have a dominant genre and then you have a subgenre. And for ours, it's never going to be romance, it's never going to be the subgenre, but it might be thriller, it might be action adventure. Those are the kinds of things that mix in with PA. But for some of these series, after I stepped away and said, okay, you're on your own, off you go, we've been training for long enough, you can do this, they went way, way, way action adventure, kind of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom kind of adventure. And our readers won't go for that. They just won't go for it. They really want to see people battling the odds and battling the elements and overcoming themselves and overcoming the challenges of their environment. They do not want to see something that is that heavy, either in thriller or action adventure. So some of those chapters are completely rewritten with the same characters, with the same arc, going through the same kinds of things, but without the action adventure bits. So there are some pretty significant changes in all three of the series, because in all three series we went to that thriller action adventure vibe. And I've got some theories about why that happened, but I had to pull us back into our brand of post-apocalyptic fiction. Other things that I made changes for. So we had very, very deliberately made a decision to have people spread out, so that we're geographically spread out, so that we had to watch the timelines and make sure that the timelines were in sync, but we didn't have to worry about the nitty-gritty of continuity that you do if people are close to each other or have overlapping stories, as they very often do in multiple POV books. And when it came down to it and we had the final books, those threads came together, but they didn't always come together tightly enough for it to be a really satisfying ending. So I made some changes to who people were in relation to each other, where they ended up, and the choices that they made along the way. So you'll see that there are some plot differences. I did my very, very best to keep as many of your words on the page as I possibly could, but I had to go for genre expectation over keeping any one particular writer's words on the page. There are a couple of cases where we had characters who weren't relatable, who were on the kind of, and I talked to the writers who were writing these particular characters, whose characters were particularly cruel, particularly detached. A couple of psychopaths were in the mix, and we had to do something about their relatability for the main POV character. Of course you can have a villain who isn't relatable. I mean, it's better if your villain is a little bit relatable, even if they're doing wrong things. Remember, nobody believes that they are the villain of their own piece. They're the villain of someone else's piece, but they're really not the villain of their own story. And so there were a couple of characters who really were entirely unrelatable, and I had to tweak their profiles to make them more relatable, so that we didn't have people who, readers, who hated characters who they weren't supposed to hate. They might have had strong feelings about them or thought they were making bad decisions, but to actively hate a character is a really, really big decision. And we're not writing in genres where you actively hate characters. So there are genres where you can have characters that you actually hate. We just aren't in those genres. So I made some of those changes. There were some language things that I'd forgotten about. We talked about our language being pretty vanilla, but I had forgotten that we absolutely do not use God's name in vain, in not the actual literal biblical sense of what that means, which is about oaths, oath binding and oath taking. We don't say God in these books unless it's in prayer. And so you'll see that the gods, excuse me, I'm having some trouble. God became goodness sakes. Instead of for God's sakes, it would be for goodness sake. And the swearing all got dialed way, way back, as did the horror. There were some horror elements that crept in that don't belong in this genre, and comedy. And this often happens in really, really high tense situations. Your characters can get to riffing or quipping, or it's a real thing that happens, and it's got to do with where stuff is in the brain and how close those centers are to each other in the brain. So I had to take those things out. Horror and comedy had to come out. There were some factual things that I had to correct, and I want to thank my team who helped me get there. Erin and Michael have read, between them, Erin, Michael and Josie, between them have read all of these books, and we caught certain things like it couldn't be this kind of a tank, it couldn't be that kind of a helicopter. You'd be shocked at how much research goes into how far can a human being walk on any given day. I mean, I drill into my own research very, very deeply, and it was clear that some people had put a helicopter in or put a tank in or put something else in. And I remember very early on in my own series, Michael Raymond, who I think probably has read all of these books, he definitely read all of Melt. He came back and said, I have got a prepper friend who said if this was the knife that they were carrying, that they would close the book, because clearly that's very, very stupid. Because we've got those readers who know about the brand of the thing. So I had to make some of those changes. And then there were a few places where there were POV slip-ups that I had to fix. There was some mechanical stuff that I had to fix. And then there was some grammar stuff that I had to fix. We're writing in 3 languages. We're writing in American, Australian, and British English, and they are different. And American readers, my theory around American readers is that they have so much media that is in American that they believe that it is the default for them. American English is correct and all other Englishes are not correct. British readers are much more forgiving. So if you're writing in more than one country, you will discover that I think Australian, and the Australians correct me if I'm wrong, but British readers definitely are much more forgiving of American spellings and American grammar, because American grammar is different. I get caught with this. Our use of definite and indefinite articles, whether or not you go to hospital or go to the hospital, whether or not collective nouns was or were, I still get them wrong. Fortunately for me, Erin and Michael get me right again. And so I will have made some of those changes. I will remind you. Oh, yes. So we used Story Genius for drilling down into the misbelief. And one of the other changes that I made was when we were first training, I really wanted to make sure everybody understood misbelief and they were hitting that note. But when it came to the whole book, we were hitting that note too hard because we were hitting it in every chapter, and it doesn't need to be on the page, because once the reader understands it, they understand that that's what's going on, and you can take it out and have that be implied. So that was another one of the changes that I made. We use this. I recommend that some of you go back and have a look at this again for plotting purposes. Oh, you know what? I didn't bring it with me. There are a couple of trope books that are really, really excellent that I would recommend that you go and have a look for. I'll put something in the comments so that you can go and find them, because some people missed the tropes. They went off the tracks and went into the dominant genre being trope heavy for a different genre. And I really want you to think about that when you're writing your own. If you are part of any of these writers groups who have people who are doing very well talking about what they did, you'll see again and again that they drilled into the tropes. Now, if you're writing literary fiction, which we are not writing that kind of literary fiction. We are writing the kind of fiction that drills into the tropes and gets them right so that we are delivering the same in a different way. I believe that all fiction is genre fiction, but there is a very, very particular thing that you can do in what's dubbed literary fiction that you cannot do in ours, and that is experiment with the language in certain ways, mess with the tropes in a certain way. You can mess with them if you are not spoofing them for us, for our purposes in post-apoc. In fact, I would say for a lot of genres other than comedy, you can't really spoof the genres, because if you make fun of the reader, they will put your book down. Sorry, I got a little bit off track there because I care about this a lot. Drill into the tropes, really make sure you know what you're doing. Can't recommend this enough. Read it again because it's really, really good. And I believe that for close third or deep point of view is the dominant way that books are written. Of course, I'm about to move into steamy rom-coms and they're written in first. So, but for post-apoc, we're mostly writing in third, and for our purposes, we're writing in close third. So, get the version of the last version of the book before it came to me. Get the new version from Micah. If you're super ambitious, which I know some of you are, do it for all three of the series, and then you'll really start to get to see what it is that we're aiming for and why I made the changes that I made. So I hope you enjoy them. I really hope that you read them, because I'm incredibly proud of what you did, and I'm very proud of where these stories ended up, and what we've discovered over the last year, talking to Micah, over the last year, is we make up a chunk of our money when the omnibuses come out. So they will come out after a tail, after the series are done and income starts tailing off, then we do the omnibuses. So keep a lookout for those. But read these books and do the work and write your own books, write lots of books. Michael will let you know when he's opening up submissions again for Muonic to look for new writers. You'll be writing in your own voice, you'll be writing your own stories, you won't have me breathing down your neck, and it's a much, much, much easier thing to write your own books than to collaborate with 5 other people in a voice that you don't necessarily write, and in a tone you don't necessarily write. It would be much, much easier to write your own series, and I hope some of you will consider applying to write for Muonic. All right, my dears, I'm very proud of you. I'm very proud of what we've done, and I hope that this is useful to you.